Thank you. Joined now by Mike McTague. Thank you very much for joining us today from Ohio University Eastern. And you've been doing this for a very long time. We took a look at a couple of county by counties there with the presidential race, but it was a clean sweep for Donald Trump in the Ohio Valley. Why is that?
In part, it looks like, first, some questions are answered. Number one, higher voter turnout than was projected or expected. Second, the idea early voting registration is at an all-time high level, including our counties, especially on the Ohio side. We're watching some of the rise of some people who are ex-military who are doing well. Mr. Hoagland, Mr. Weld, Bill Johnson. Wasn't expected, but it certainly come through. I think those might be considered upsets, especially Hoagland. We're also seeing that in our part of the world, there were a lot of angry voters. Perhaps we'll have to find out later whether they voted for or against various candidates, but it certainly looks like they came out and voted.
Now, Republicans really having a good day here in the Ohio Valley. Is this just a trickle-down effect from this area being so pro-Trump?
If you would have gone back many decades, you would have found that Belmont and Jefferson County would have been Democratic, and now you're seeing several of the key figures who were incumbents getting bumped out, which is surprising, Lou Gentile being one. The other factor would be that there seems to be a change in the northern panhandle of West Virginia and also on the eastern Ohio side. Some of those counties that had once been traditional Democrat, partly because maybe coal was attacked, maybe because industry has left, they're now moving more toward the Republican side, and there's a swing change that's definitely noteworthy.
We're talking about coal and possibly a reflection then of the top of the Democratic ticket.
Yes.
Hillary Clinton has said some very public things that people do not like in this area about coal, and of course NAFTA falls from her husband and it trickles over to Hillary Clinton. I also want to ask you, 11% last I checked was the margin for Donald Trump in Ohio over Hillary Clinton. That's crazy big, isn't it, for Ohio?
And we've still got to wait and see what happens with the three C's, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. But the rural counties definitely have gone for Mr. Trump, and it's kind of a trend that's showing up. If you take a look at the maps, these heartland maps show the red and the rim out on the Pacific and Atlantic seaboard. That's the blue. But we're definitely over here in the part that's going to be red at this point in time.
Now, as the evening has progressed and Donald Trump has looked like he's either very close in some of these states that Hillary Clinton looked like she was going to win and possibly win rather easily, and he's had the lead in electoral votes since the night began. The Dow Jones has gone down 600 points. Now, what does this say? Is this just this is obviously futures. Trading hasn't begun yet for tomorrow, but what does this say about where the electorate is right now?
Watch that carefully, though. In part, almost after every election, there's a drop-off. And in the month of October, it's also a sell-off, and then there's a bounce back. But historically, they'd like to see a businessman or somebody who had a certain agenda. So we'll watch and see whether NAFTA and maybe the trade programs, the Pacific package that President Obama has been trying to get through as a big issue. Mrs. Clinton has made her position, Donald Trump has made his, and maybe that's going to be an effective function. There's a lot of companies that have lots of cash. They're awash, and yet the interest rates are low. It's hard to say where they're going to put their money. So let's see what happens with the stock market, not only here but abroad as well, and see whether they favor how this election is coming out. Once upon a time, it was projected that it looked like Mrs. Clinton was going to have an easier time of it. They may have to rethink their position if by chance Mr. Trump starts to make it more of a race.
Now, many states still have not been declared. Obviously, the states out west, especially California, is going to be an easy blue state. But you've got a situation in Utah where an independent, Evan McMullin, was able to pull almost neck and neck with Donald Trump. And what does that say if Evan McMullin is able to somehow pull off Utah? What could that do here in this map?
Some of that, the feature is, we were worried about Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, and Michigan as being have-to-wins for Mr. Trump, and the suspect was that Mrs. Clinton was going to take Florida, and that's not necessarily turning out. So then it shifts to the other states, the marginal states, the ones that were out west. The polls closed later there, and all of a sudden, now they want to know. I think Mrs. Clinton had just picked up Colorado, so they're going to look at the Utahs, they're going to look at the Washington, the Oregons, the Californias, and see if that doesn't turn it in some fashion. A lot of easy states. Remember, she had an easier time of it. She had to win some of the big states and only fewer of them. Mr. Trump had to win a huge number of states and then grab some of the states that had bigger electoral votes. So far, it's moving in Mr. Trump's favor, surprisingly.
Now, Donald Trump, very easy time in West Virginia. That was called essentially the minute after the polls closed, and apparently a very easy time in Ohio as well. Is this something that can stick with Ohio? Because I mean, that's 11% for a Republican. That's
Once
very
again,
big number.
Ohio has always been the traditional bellwether. If a
Right.
Republican candidate was going to win the
Absolutely, yes.
presidency, it was Ohio. Well, now we're trying to say, can you offset a loss of Pennsylvania? Can you look for some of the ways in which we're determining the votes? We had expected a large black turnout vote because Mr. Obama had been able to achieve it. Now, as Mrs. Clinton, it doesn't appear that the black vote is as strong, and the Hispanic vote is stronger. So maybe that turns certain states, but there isn't a huge Hispanic population in Pennsylvania. Let's say she wins that, but what happens in the Detroits and in the upper state of Michigan? It looks as if it's really coming down to the possibility of the rural counties, once again trying to offset the Detroits and the Grand Rapids and give Mr. Trump a little bit of an edge.
All right, a lot to digest. We'll check
Indeed.
back in with you in the 11 o'clock hour, Erica.